Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the June installment of our continuing education and professional development webinars from the Religion Communicators Council. As is our wont, just to lead us off a little bit, I wanted to kind of describe the Religion Communicators Council. The RCC was founded in 1929, and it is an association of communications professionals who work for and with a diverse group of faith-based organizations in the areas of communications, public relations, advertising, and development. We really, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that diversity among our faiths. We are a truly interfaith organization, and we learn and grow from each other as we both communicate our own faiths and learn about others. Our members represent as well a variety of different communications disciplines, including editors, writers, designers, photographers, videographers, broadcast, social media, web developers, marketers, fundraisers, project managers, and of course, students. We try to capture all the disciplines. We try to capture all of the faiths. But one through thread that we have through all of this is that storytelling is vital to everything that we do. Whether our jobs are in the writing category or in the, face-to-face PR side of working for our faiths, we're always telling stories all the time. And so we're very, very pleased to have with us today Carolyn Clendenin, who is with CMC Creative, who has agreed to talk today about storytelling. Um, just for her background, real quick, Carolyn, like I said, is the CEO of CMC Creative. It's a communications consulting firm that harnesses the power of storytelling to drive change. Carolyn specializes in strategic communications planning, message development, earned media, and writing and editing. She has worked with many faith-based groups, including Union Theological Seminary right here in New York City, where I'm based, and Repairers of the Breach. Um, One of the things that always strikes me with storytelling is that storytelling is how people remember things. Even when I was doing more of a traditional PR role, not a faith-based one, and I was trying to coach people on how to work with journalists, I would say anytime you can phrase your answer in the form of a story, both the journalist, that gives them something to write a lot easier, and it also gives people something to remember, something that will stick in their head. And so I personally have been thinking about storytelling for a long time, but I'm excited to get Carolyn's take on this. Um, so with that, I will turn the time over to Carolyn. She'll present to us for a little while. I think it's going to be a little bit interactive, and but we should still have time for some Q&A at the end. So please, Carolyn Clendenin.
Hi, I am truly so excited to be here for this presentation. Talking about storytelling and message development is just my absolute favorite thing in this universe. And I'm so excited to share the tidbits that I've learned with you. As Ryan alluded to, I find that these sorts of presentations are most effective when they do have some interactive components and that you feel like you're actually getting tidbits that you can apply in your organizations. So in that vein, one, please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions about anything that I present in real time. I really want to make sure that this is a helpful presentation for you. So just do not hesitate to chime in and ask your questions as we're going. And number two, there might be some times during the presentation where I ask if you have any particular things that you want to bring up based on that point. So please go ahead and chime in then as well. Truly, interaction, I think, is just the best way to learn and actually apply the things that are being said. So just let me know. The other thing to know is that I am I'd say I'm more on the casual side of presenters. I want this to be a conversation. I want it to be fun and something that brings light to your day. So it's not going to be super buttoned up in corporate language, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be pretty casual. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slides and go in. Okay. Can everyone see this slide deck? Okay, awesome. I love the thumbs up. And I can only see about six of your little head things. So if someone has a question, Ginny and Ryan, I'm counting on you to let me know that someone's raising their hand.
People
Okay,
can also put questions in the chat too, and I can monitor the chat.
perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Cool. Alrighty, let's dive in. Okay, so I'm going to emphasize this a gazillion times. Um, every single communications material should connect back to the mission and goals of your organization. Um, I think that successful communications depends on you having a very solid foundation of what is your organization actually trying to accomplish. Um, and what if your organization is successful, what does that look like? And then think about, okay, what communications materials do we need to actually accomplish that mission? A good way to test if your communications is aligned with your mission is just asking yourself for every piece of collateral you produce, how does this advance our goals? If you are not able to answer that question, that probably is a sign that that communications material needs some tweaking, or that maybe we need to revisit how we're actually thinking about the materials that we're producing. And the reason that this is important is because resources are limited. If we had unlimited resources, it would be oh so fun to just put out a bunch of pieces of collateral and see what sticks. But we have to be realistic. We have limited time, money, resources. So we need to make sure that all of those resources are pointed towards the ultimate goals of our organization. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty of audience development and storytelling, but I want that all to be under the umbrella of how does this actually drive what my organization is trying to do. Okay, these are some of my favorite little isms about the audience. So the audience, who you're chatting to at your organization. And we're going to break down more specifics on this. But the first thing I really, really want to impress is something that someone's far smarter than me came up with, which is the audience is the message. I'm going to say that one more time just because emphasis helps us remember. So the audience is the message. Messages are in many ways meaningless if we don't have an audience attached to it, if we don't understand who we're speaking to and what actually resonates with the people that we are trying to connect with. So as we're thinking about the best messages to relay, it is absolutely indispensable that we consider the audiences that we're speaking to, because that affects every single piece of the message. Is it actually relevant? What's the best way to communicate this? Just remember that. This is like a more blunt message, but I do think it's pretty resonant. If you're trying to talk to everyone, you talk to no one. So if your message is like, we want to bring everyone into the fold, that probably means it's going to end up not really resonating with any one of those specific audiences. So I understand that urge so deeply to try to make sure that everyone comes away with something, but ultimately that's not going to be the case. Like, for example, there's no way I could make this presentation if I didn't know I was speaking to communicators who focus on religious issues. That would be crazy. There would be no way for me to actually form points that resonate with you. And then the hard truth is that you very likely won't convince people to suddenly care about your issue unless they have some sort of connection, unless they're feeling some sort of deep like resonance within them. So I know, like, along with that inkling to try to speak to like this broad audience, remember that the chance of you actually convincing someone who already doesn't care is really, really low and really tough. Any questions so far? Okay. Okay, defining the audiences. So like, who are we actually chit-chatting with? The big thing, again, because we're always connecting back to our like big strategy and like, what is our organization trying to do? So like, when you're thinking about your goals, what audiences do you actually need to advance them? Is it donors, volunteers, beneficiaries, advocates, corporate partners? There's so many different audiences that you need to actually potentially advance those goals. And then it's a question of, okay, well, now that we know what audiences we care about, how do we actually prioritize those audiences? I highly recommend like doing this sort of exercise for your organization. It's like, what audiences do we actually need to convince in order to advance our goals? And then which ones are going to help us drive our impact the most? Because that will help you form messages that prioritize the audiences that you care about. We're about to dive into like some really nitty gritty specifics about audiences, but one general note before that is there is no general public. One of the most common things I hear as a consultant is, well, we want the general public to know about our issue. And I'm like, who is that? What do they look like? What are they doing? What's their lives? Like, I have no idea what the general public is. And if there is truly an average human in this life, I doubt that speaking to them is going to speak to the people who you want to advance to your goals. So just to remember, like there's always more specificity there than general public. Okay, now we're going into super details. Get ready. Okay, so audience personas. So this is a framework that can be helpful for defining your audiences and just thinking about them a little bit more critically. Um, and it's when you break down the audiences that matter, what do they look like? What are they doing in their lives? What is actually happening in these people's lives that you're trying to connect with? So some general demographics that predict behavior: age range, location, their job, the size of their company, their race, gender, income bracket, location. So many details. What do those people's days look like? How do they get their news? What are their values? Like, what do they actually care about at the end of the day? What drives them? What motivates them? And what are their challenges? And I know that, like, it's like, wow, we're figuring out a lot of humans, but the goal of a persona is to kind of develop a few templates that you can use to define your primary audiences. So you're not trying to create a persona or figure out every single human that interacts with your organizations, but ideally you'd be able to identify some buckets where we could start to answer some of these questions so we can develop messaging that's more effective. Okay, so this is a lot of text, which I hate to put a lot of text on slides, but just to give you a sense of like all the factors that could come into an organization. This is like what an audience persona might look like. So we're just going to name this person Fiona. Fiona's rad. She's a donor at a faith-centered nonprofit. We have some information about her background and demographics, her age, her former job, her income, her location. We also have information about her values and interests. So what her core values are, her interests, her preferred media. We have information about her motivations and goals, why she actually supports you, what her goals are, pain points and barriers, and then finally preferred engagement and messaging. This is so much information, but all of these pieces can come together and give you some threads that are helpful for speaking with your audiences. I think I saw a question in the chat or a pop-up in the chat. Let's
Yeah,
look.
on the last slide when you were talking about the
Yeah.
persona,
Yeah.
you had gender, like location type and location as two different things. What's the difference between those two? If you could just.
Totally. Yeah. And it's let me just this. So there's like rural, urban, suburban, the like type of environment they might live in versus like the more specifics of that like location that they live in. And it might make sense for your organization to focus on like it might be that you want to focus on like more rural audiences generally versus knowing like, okay, this person's in Texas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like I would live in suburbia, but I'm in New York area. So whether I'm focusing on New York or whether I'm focusing on suburban dads, that would be the difference between location type and location.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. Any other questions? We got a good one to start.
But I was looking at so you suggest having this kind of very, very deep dive breakdown for your audiences?
Wow, what a great segue into my next point. Okay, so again, we always have to exist in the world where resources are limited, and we have to acknowledge the realities of that. Is it good? So, and this is where I come into like detailed versus general guidelines. How detailed can we be? Is it worth it to be that detailed? Like, does it make sense for your organization to be that detailed? I generally think it makes sense to like have a few sessions, probably a year, where you kind of go over what this might look like and really think critically about the different audiences that you serve. That being said, does it make sense to have like six of those templates, like with all of those nitty gritty details? I don't know. Like that might be like a step too far, and it might end up um that could end up like introducing complexity where it's not necessarily needed. That being said, I do think it's a good thought experiment to go through those nitty gritty questions and see how many you can answer and see how well you actually know your audience base and like what pieces of information that what through lines you can figure out so you can develop the best messaging. So that's a long way to say I don't have a definite answer for you. I think it really depends on your organization, but I do think it's worth it to go through those questions and see how many you can answer. And if you can figure out a few templates that make sense, the point is not to introduce more work. The point is to make your communications more streamlined, powerful, effective. So if you're finding that going through all these questions is like not being super helpful to develop messages, don't do it. But if you find like, oh, you know what? There's like three big messages that speak to all of these audiences, then great. So, some things to consider: resource expenditure, sacrificing nuance. Like, if you have a lot of really different audiences, like breaking them down into templates might not make sense. And then organizational buy in. Often communicators kind of have to fight to like get the C suite to pay attention to them. Like, realistically, are your leaders going to care if you develop these personas? That's a question for you to answer. I'm more than happy to like chat through some nuances here. Does anyone have a question? Like, maybe want to present, like, oh, does this make sense for my organization?
Well, I think the question is, uh, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? Like the C-suite or the higher ups, however
Yeah.
you want to define that, often tend to look at this kind of exercise as futile. It's like,
Yep.
well, why can't we just talk to the general public, right? So, what would be your advice for pushing back on that mindset?
And this is such a good question because it goes back to my starting point, which is like you should always be able to answer, why does this thing advance our goals? And I think you always have to frame the communications, the strategic communications work that you're doing as advancing the goals. So I think it could be helpful to explain why understanding our audience is better, developing more nuances, understanding the complexities can make your organization more effective, save time, save money in the long run, and really advance those goals. I'm not going to lie, it's a tough sell. Always a tough sell to sell strategic communications. Like, I think that's the world we all exist in, right? We're always like, no, I promise it matters. But the more you can connect it back to the organization's goals, the better your chance of success will be. Does that help? Cool. I get it. I'm always there. It's like, no, I promise this will matter. This will matter. Okay. Oh my gosh. Wow. I even had a slide. Friendly reminder, always connect this back to your goals. Again, like it's not like we're developing audiences for the sake of it. It's like, okay, how will this actually make our communications more effective and more powerful in the long term? Cool. Okay. Before we leave audience world, we're going to next to storytelling worlds. Any other initial questions about audience development? Okay, cool. I recognize also that a lot of these are like, it kind of depends. And I think that's just true. Like, it does kind of depend and communicate, like that's the struggle that communicators have all the time, but it's always more effective to go through the struggle than to just kind of spaghetti at the wall. Okay, storytelling. I love stories so much. Um, I think I was thinking about like, okay, what fundamentally makes a good story at the end of the day? And I think it just really boils down to creating connection. They they create this sort of like human bond with other people. They elicit all these emotions. They elicit excitement, anger, passion, hope, joy, all the emotions that like all of the humans experience. They connect to our most basic humanity. Like they are the core of who we are as human beings, which is why they resonate so much and why they can be so powerful. Like people remember them because everyone experiences those types of emotions. I always like to apply things to like our real life context. So um, there's like an excitement when someone says, like, if someone calls you after work and they're like, oh my gosh, I have a story for you. You're in, right? You're locked in the moment that person says that. But like if you say, gosh, I have a press release. I mean, I can night and day, right? You're like, I could not care less about the press release. But when you tell me I have a story, I'm in. Um, and so I always tell people like treat every piece of collateral as a story. You're going to treat every single press release, every blog, every newsletter, every social media post, every fact. It's none of those. It's a story. And I know this might sound like I the eyes might roll at this one, but like it's just so essential that like every piece of collateral is this precious little morsel of a story, because the more you treat each of those pieces of collateral as stories, I promise it will be more effective throughout your organization. Okay, so there's like a gazillion things that make a good story, right? But I want to make sure, but I know that in these presentations, you're going to walk away and you're going to remember three things because that's what research says. So we're going to focus on the big things for like what makes a good story. So first off, it's attention grabbing. You've heard this all a gazillion times. There's an enormous amount of content in the world, especially with the explosion of AI, blah, blah, blah. There's a gazillion things people are looking at every single day. And you have to be able to grab their attention. People are looking for stories that offer a unique perspective, like something that they haven't heard before, something that resonates, but like, I'm like, ooh, but I haven't heard of that part of it, or I haven't heard of that angle. It can be really tough to figure out what that attention grabbing thing is, but I would always ask yourself, okay, like what's the unique part of this story? Like what when you boil it down is actually like the most interesting, like attention grabbing thing. And I truly mean this when I say like test these on your friends and family. Like I'm always testing stuff. I'm like, okay, my client did this today, like here, and I'll describe it in different ways to like figure out what actually gets their attention. And that can be a really helpful experiment. Um, Emotionally relatable. Um, People connect to a piece when they can connect to like the sentiment behind it and the emotions behind it. There's like, there's, I group like compelling characters and nuanced conflict under this. But at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about like the physical circumstances around a story. It's like the emotions that are behind the story. So um, it's, for example, if you were an organization like grappling with food insecurity and you told a story about someone grappling with that issue, the audience doesn't necessarily have to have experienced food insecurity. It's like, have I experienced hunger? Have I felt that before? And that's the way you like connect with people, by connecting with emotions that they have felt. So ask yourself, is this story like emotionally relatable? Can people relate to the emotions that this story elicits? And that can be like such a powerful, powerful thing. Okay, a good story, I'd also say, and this it's not crucial, but it is, I think, really helpful. It's timely. It's really difficult to get people to care about a topic if it doesn't connect to like what's happening right here and right now, what's happening in our world, what are people experiencing, what's going down. Consider the news cycle, holidays, significant cultural moments. Like, try to connect your stories back to something that you know is going to resonate with people in this time, because otherwise it's really hard to focus on your story when there's a gazillion things other happening that are happening in this world. And then finally, a good story is not an advertisement. They're not like, look at all this great work we did. There are elements of it, but it's more like when you promote your work, everything should be grounded in the context of a broader societal issue, a broader context, essentially. So we're not just like rah rah rah, here's a cool thing we did. It's making sure that we are framing it in terms of this bigger societal issue that people can resonate with. Okay, I've developed a little checklist that you can screenshot, and you can just always ask yourself, does my story have these qualities? Because if it checks all these, it's probably worth pursuing. So the next part of this is going to be like, okay, how do we actually tell a good story? Does anyone have any questions about what makes a good story? Like, oh my gosh, perfect. Wow. Everyone knows exactly what makes a good story. I love it. Love it. Okay, cool. All right. Deep breath. Next section. Okay. Yay, another friendly reminder. How do these stories connect back to our goals? Remember, we're always, always, always figuring out how they connect back to our organization's goals. I'm sorry I'm a broken record, but it's truly like, if you're going to remember one thing from this presentation, that's probably the thing I want you to remember.
I actually do have a question.
Yeah.
Um, you were talking about like testing out stories on your roommate or whatever, like trying it out different ways and, which one of these grabs your attention. How do we avoid like that kind of idea? Because what would probably happen is we would draft something, right? And then we could test it. I could test it out on my wife or whatever, but we're most likely going to test it out on somebody at work. So how do we avoid that becoming not an echo chamber per se, but like a closed feedback loop? Because it's the same people telling us that this is a good thing when it might not actually be a good thing outside of our organization.
Yeah, okay. There's a lot of layers there, actually. Okay, so I would actually recommend not doing the coworker approach, because there are people who are already deeply baked in your issue. They already care. So I would, when you're doing this little like message testing session, I would actually just recommend it going outside of your organization. The next layer, so sorry, in your question, is it that you're concerned about these people not giving you honest feedback, or is it that
I'm
you are,
more concerned about what I think should resonate with an audience. I mean, there's a reason why we both work for the same organization, right? And so what I think could resonate could be what they would think would resonate. And so all of a sudden we're both like, yeah, 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 that's perfect. When really it's kind of niche and wonky to the both of us and not necessarily, attractive to anybody else.
yeah. Okay, yeah. So yeah, again, we're gonna avoid coworkers, or like, for the sake of like this particular exercise. So no coworkers outside of that, bubbles, friends, family, etc. I think a couple of things I would think about. One is, so when I do this little experiment, it's mostly like figuring out the attention grabbing piece. So it's like, what is actually interesting about this story? Not necessarily like a whole, oh, we're workshopping a whole story together. I think this is more so like an experiment in terms of grabbing people's attention and like seeing what's actually interesting. So I'm not saying workshop an entire story with your wife. I'm saying, like, what did your wife care about when you talked to her? Um, the other thing is like, in an ideal world, these people would match the audiences that you're trying to reach at your organization, because you would want to make sure that the messages that you're developing actually match the people that you're speaking to at this organization. Again, that's where I would say, like, we're not relying on these people. They're like a little experimentation center. So don't like take it as a data point, but not necessarily the whole complete, oh, I've resolved everything. I figured it out. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So, how do we tell this magical story now that we've figured out what it is? So, I think this is probably my most important tip for this section. Don't bury the lead. This is the biggest mistake that people make. It's like they're like, oh, we're going to build intrigue. Our subject line is going to be like a new mystery. People don't know what that means. Like, what are we talking about? There's a million things happening in my life. What are we connecting to? What's happening? Make sure that you can clearly answer the question, like, what is the headline of this story? And just put the most important information out front, because that's what's actually going to get people to pay attention versus trying to like build this intrigue and try to keep it general and vague. So maybe it relates to a lot of people. Just say what's going to happen and the most interesting thing that's going to happen. That's what gets people engaged at the get go. The other big thing that I think is really important is being authentic, and leaning into your authentic voice. As I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I'm like a little bit of a sillier person. I'm more conversational. I'm more down to earth. If I try to be buttoned up and like more straightforward and like more corporate language, it's just a big flop. It's a mess. It's horrible. I hate it. People hate it. It's bad. Um, Obviously you want to keep a tone of professionalism and legitimacy and credibility. Like, I'm not saying go off the deep end and, just be the most casual human you've ever been, but I do think it's important to lean into the parts of your personality that feel most genuine, because people can sense it when you're not being authentic. And to connect with people, it's just really important to like have a sense of who you are as a human and how your voice resonates. So lean into that authentic voice. Chats, questions?
Yeah, I put in the chat room is the inverted pyramid structure. Like that's what I learned. Is that still relevant here? The who, what, why, when, where, and you start kind of broad and then bring it down into like your more detail.
Yeah. So, okay, great question. So there's different yes, it's absolutely still relevant to answer your question succinctly. There's two like kind of pyramids that like even you'll see this in reporter stories. There's the we start with a specific example of something happening, then we dive into like the broader context of all that. And then there's the other pyramid, which is we start with the broad context of what's happening, and then we provide specific examples. And both of those are like fine ways of executing a story, but you still want to like to get the person interested in the first place. It's figuring out what is the most interesting thing, like what are we actually starting with, and then you can go to that general context and then specifics, or you can go specific general. The big thing is like, what's the subject line we're using? What is the opening line in what we're saying? Like, I very much mean like, what's the starting point? And then from there, you can use either pyramid structure. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, yeah, for sure. This is a really good example of my old boss used to do this, so give credit to him. But he would show us this like really good movie trailer for a very bad movie. And he'd be like, look at this movie trailer. It's sick. Like they got so many people to buy tickets for this movie based on this trailer. And then the movie absolutely sucked. But that didn't really matter because people went to see the movie because the trailer was good. And you'd always be like, that's why your lead needs to be really good. Like, obviously, you don't want to put out a bad movie, but if you don't put out a good trailer, people don't even see the movie. That was his little example. Do with that what you will.
Hey, Carolyn.
Yeah.
Hi, John Rivera from ICJS.
Hi.
When I have people who are struggling for a lead,
Yeah.
I will often ask them to think as if they're explaining it to a spouse or someone. You're going to tell them whatever is most interesting to you. You're going to lead off with, yeah, what's going to grab their attention. So if you just think conversationally, And that's very much in line with what you've been saying. That'll help you get to that most interesting nugget very quickly.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
then just one caution about being authentic and speaking in the language of the people you're connecting with. If you're trying to, you still have to be authentic when you're speaking the language of the people you're connecting with. I've seen a lot of people trying to connect with a younger audience by using their slang, and it just is not authentic, and it just is so cringeworthy. Um, and so there's that balance
You mean
there.
a 40-year-old shouldn't say 6'7", Ryan? Is that what you're saying? Like,
Exactly.
Ryan, you have no Riz.
Yeah. Yes, complete underline of that point. And that's like, it would be like, if I was to do something like that, I would probably, if I was to try to speak the language of like a much younger audience, I would make fun of myself doing it. Like I would make it very clear that I'm in on the joke. I don't know these words and I'm using these words to connect, but like I don't know these words. Like you, again, you want to remain authentic to yourself while explaining to audiences like, oh, I see where you're coming from. I might not be out of the age demographic, but I get it. So yeah, people can have fun with it. Um, and then providing audiences with next steps. So like, okay, I have this great story. What am I doing with this story? What steps should I take as someone who has now been interested in this story? Okay. Other important pieces to telling a story. Flagging, I think, is such an underutilized tool. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, because I'm speaking with communicators, but I think just as important is like is the story interesting, is how am I signaling that it is interesting? So I, as you probably have heard throughout this presentation, have given you a lot of little flags or clues, like what I'm going to say is important, pay attention to me. So some examples are like, if there's anything you take from this presentation, it's this. We've learned a lot today. Here's the most important thing. I can't stress this point enough. It's really
Now,
important
let me be clear.
yes. Make no mistake. I think it's just really important to signal, okay, now chime in, people, because people zone out quickly. So much research shows that people are zoning out more quickly than ever. You need little phrases to get people to chime back in and be like, okay, I'm back in with my new fresh brain. The another big thing is considering different mediums for your stories: audio, video, little quote blocks, interactive elements. Maybe you want to send out a little fun quiz, webinars, etc. Obviously, I could do like a gazillion presentations about how you pick your medium, but something to consider is like, what's the best way to tell my story? And then finally, more often than not, I do generally recommend people keep their stories pretty short and succinct. Again, there's information overload these days. People just want a quick little snippet and they're, what do I take away from it? Only include the necessary details. I think one of the biggest challenges organizations come to me with is like, oh, but we have so many great details. They're all important. They're all so important. We have to figure out the most important ones and just boil it down succinctly. It's way more effective to keep that message simple and tight. And an option though, if you're like, no, we do have some audience members who really want that longer story, you can have a shorter option, and then if you're really interested, here's another longer one option. But generally, I find we want to keep it nice and short. Okay, this is just a couple of like quick examples. They're not fully fleshed out, but I just wanted to provide some contrast between like what crafting a good story might look like versus a story that might be a little bit more boring and less exciting. So for example, not a story is faith-based organization hosts an event about climate change. We have our little checklist. It's not super attention grabbing. My heartstrings being pulled out? No. Timely, I'll give it a timely. it's not an advertisement, but it's not like focused on like the big meat of the subject. A better story, and again, this is not fully fleshed out, but a kind of theme is faith leaders are stepping up in the fight against climate change. Here's why they're so crucial. So that's just a little bit more framing. It's a little punchier. It's a little bit more contextualized, a little more attention grabbing. Again, not perfect, but like better. Um, Not a story. A nonprofit launches a new podcast on faith and criminal justice. Really cool, not a story. Not super attention grabbing again. I don't really feel the emotions. Not super timely, depending on how you frame it. And then feels more advertisement-y. And then this is kind of a little blurb I wrote up. I'm like, what happens when the church shows up at the prison gate? More interactive question. And then the next sentence just includes a bunch of details about what this might look like to paint a picture in the reader's minds, make you feel a little bit more, make you grasp the story a little bit more. So these are kind of some examples of like things that might come up in your organization and potentially how we might twist them to be a little bit more exciting and compelling. Okay, my conclusion. One more time, every piece of communication should connect back to the organization's overarching goals. Number two, the audience is the message. And then number three, a good story is attention grabbing, emotionally relatable, timely, and not an advertisement. And that is it for my little deck. I'm going to close out of here and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you so much, first of all, Carolyn. I really appreciate it. That was a lot of really, really good content. We do have about 15 minutes for questions. If people have questions that they want to ask her, I will, however, take the microphone or the privilege of having the mic right now anyway, and ask you a first question and kind of get the ball rolling. Um, and I'm just curious, like, you've emphasized aligning the story with organizational strategy a lot, right? Can you walk us through an example of how you've done that, how you've helped a faith-based organization do that, or how, an example of how a faith-based organization can connect its big picture mission to like one concrete story?
Totally. Okay. Great question. So, one of my clients, as I mentioned, is New York's very own Union Theological Seminary. And their goal is to train progressive faith leaders. That is their ultimate goal, is to be able to train those sorts of leaders. So we say, okay, one of our primary audiences, then in that case, must be prospective students and people who might be interested in coming to that sort of goal. So, okay, we know that's probably one of the big audiences. Again, I'm really boiling this down, but like this would be how I go through the tree. We're like, okay, we need students who are interested in becoming progressive faith leaders. Okay, how do we talk to those students? And then we think about, okay, what are the things at Union Theological Seminary that might appeal to people who want to be progressive faith leaders? And so we think about the buckets of that. So one of Union's big buckets and one of its big priorities is providing a place for queer students to engage with faith. And queer, like, there's an increasing movement of queer people who are interested in faith. So we're like, okay, how do we talk to those people? So before Pride, we did a few stories with reporters about Union's very large queer population. So half of their incoming class is queer, which is pretty stark for a seminary. We pitched that to reporters. We got, I think, 3 really good pieces where reporters chatted with queer students at Union and queer faculty members. And then one of our faculty members wrote a piece about how all faith is queer. And then we got 3 really, really strong pieces that I think will be very appealing to prospective students who are interested in eventually becoming progressive faith leaders. So,
But sorry,
no,
so
please.
the primary audience for that was prospective students.
Prospective students. I'd say also maybe like, yeah, current students, making sure we're saying that we're aligned with those values as well.
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily we're trying to convince a conservative religious view that this is okay or anything like that. It was just we're looking at prospective students and we're going to focus on that.
Okay, this is a great question. I love this is perfect. Okay, so I did the tree to keep it simplified, but because union is also ultimately trying to accomplish that goal of advancing progressive faith values, part of their audience is also like policymakers and people in the space who might have a say in those types of who might be using more. Well, hold on, let me phrase this. What I'm trying to communicate is that there's sometimes messages that emerge that span across audiences, and you're like, okay, let's go with those messages because they're going to be important for all of our audiences. So we identified queer faith issues as a message that could resonate with like multiple audience buckets, which is why we were like excited to move with that. So prospective students was like one example of an audience we wanted to reach, but because we're also interested in advancing progressive faith values generally, it also was resonating with like, or it was also important for our other audience buckets.
Fascinating. And so you looked at the different audiences, you're like, this is a through thread, and then we can, okay.
And that's where you get those like personas like that are like helpful because you're like, oh, what actually is helpful across the different message groups. Yeah.
So I asked the question about, can you think of a current commercial on TV that meets the requirements you consider primary? And the reason I asked that is because I often use the examples of some of the ways that commercials communicate. Um, um, whether it's using humor, whether it's using um, uh, a really in-your-face message initially. And so I just wanted to see if there's a way for that you could um, uh, give an example of a commercial that's both attention grabbing, emotionally relatable, timely, and not an advertisement. Now, of course, everything on TV is an advertisement, and here's where I disagree. I'm not sure that I agree with that last part, that it's not an advertisement. So I want also for you to clarify what you mean by that. So those are my two questions.
Yeah. Okay. So the commercial is actually a really good question. I honestly don't have one that's like top of mind. Um, I like the one that keeps popping into my head is like the old Geico commercials, which I loved, which were like, this bad thing is happening, but there is good news. Like Geico can save you 15% or more on your health insurance. I'm trying to like, it's definitely attention grabbing. It's definitely emotionally relatable. Like you start with like something that is going to pull at some heartstrings and then you flip it. Timely, definitely, because it's the like worries of the day. And then not an advertisement, I would say. So my this presentation was drafted with more like nonprofit audiences in mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Which I'm a member of MMBB, a nonprofit organization. Absolutely. But I'm not sure about that last part about not an advertisement. So I really, if you could break that down just a little bit, because in some ways, um, promoting your goals, promoting your message
Yeah.
is advertising, is a form of advertising. Promoting your mission is a form of advertising. That doesn't, I agree that it has to be emotionally relatable. That I say that all the time. It's got to pull at emotional heartstrings some way.
You know, this is a really good point because when I wrote the word advertisement, I more so meant it in like the more commercial sense of it. But the way you're describing advertisement is more like it's bigger, right? It's more like essentially any tool of promotion is in a way an advertisement. So let me clarify what I mean, which is that the communication should not be solely focused on the organization's good work, but more so what that work means in the context of our society and why it's important for the audiences that you're serving. So it's not that like, promotion is of course important. Like, we want to make sure we're explaining the work that we're doing, but it's more so explaining impact than it is saying we did such a good job with this. It's like, what did that good job actually create?
Okay, that makes total sense. So it's not about the organization, it's about impacting the people that the organization is going to serve. That makes sense.
Yes,
Thank
exactly.
you.
Yeah. No, and thank you. That helps refine my thinking. And like, I'm like, okay, the next time I do this presentation, I should make that adjustment. So super helpful. Okay. Do I have any tools or market research that you use to help determine audiences? So I don't use any, like, no specific tools come to mind. I'm a big fan of stakeholder interviews, right? Or of stakeholder interviews as like one piece of this puzzle. So for example, I am working with, this is not a faith organization, but I'm working with the Greater DC Diaper Bank right now on a message plan. And I'm chatting with at least two of, like, in each bucket, I'm chatting with at least two of their donors, volunteers, corporate sponsors, institutional sponsors, and board members to get a well-rounded sense of like the audiences that they care about and what their values and priorities are. So I think market research, I actually really want to look into this now, but I do think you can find a lot of what you're looking for from the people already involved in your organization.
Do you use the analytics on social media at all to help you with that work?
Yeah, that is a big piece of what we're doing. So right now, well, there's a couple of pieces. Well, sorry, my mind is spinning because there's a gazillion elements of this. I'm also like in a similar vein to like, your communications always has to meet your goals. Your social media always has to meet your goals. So there's the first piece of like, okay, what is our social media actually trying to accomplish? Like, for example, it might be recruiting more volunteers. It might be driving people to the website. It might be raising money. For example, with the diaper bank, what I actually found out in the stakeholder interviews is that, so the situation was board members were like, we really want better social media. And I was like, why? And they were like, oh, we just want it to look professional enough to show to corporate sponsors. And I was like, oh, that's an entirely separate thing from trying to get followers and engagement. And it's just an entirely different world. I do entirely different things. So yes, the analytics are important, but again, always in the context of what are we actually trying to accomplish. And right now I'm like, I don't care about follower count. I don't care about engagement that much. They just want something that looks professional, that they can show. So
So we have two more questions. We have one in the chat. How does a platform impact the story?
yeah.
And then I have one question, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up as well, which is just what are some mistakes that you see people making when they're trying to craft a story, craft a story, try to shift this way of thinking and presenting their material, and how can we avoid those? So those last two questions, and I think we have to wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, big mistakes. I think I'm going to reiterate my other point, which was burying the lead. I think that just say what you want to say up front, and then you can dive into either the context or specific examples. But that's one of the biggest things I see is I'm like, what is the story actually saying? And I want to know that up front. The other big thing I see is too much detail that can lose the reader versus keeping them engaged and interested in the conversation. When you're so deeply involved in your organization, it is so like it's easy to think everything is really interesting. And that, is true. Interesting is a relative term, but it's always important to ask yourself, is this detail necessary to communicate the message that I actually need to share? And then, okay, how does platform impact the story? For example, different angles for Facebook as opposed to a printed piece. Yeah, again, so I mean, there's all of these questions are so good they could merit their own presentation, but I will say one, audience really matters. So I would look at the analytics on Facebook and your different platforms and see what the demographics are of the people who are engaging, because that really affects like the types of stories we're telling and what's actually going to resonate with those audiences. I think that, oh man, I'm like, my brain is, I'm like, there's a gazillion things that I would consider, but I think for like different platforms, I would consider how good are my spokespeople? How do they interact with reporters, or do they need a more controlled environment? Does my story need more visual elements to be understood? Does my what's the best way to present the data in a way that's contextually interesting? Sorry, this is again another non-answer, but there's so many factors that I think can go into that type of thing. And I'm more than happy to, I can drop my contact info in the chat if it's helpful, but more than happy to be a thought partner if anyone needs help.
I was going to say, please do drop your contact info in the chat, and maybe we'll have to just do a part two of this series focused specifically on that, because there would be a lot for
Yeah.
this. But we are at our time, Carolyn. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank Carolyn Clendenin for all of her insights and content, and for just, I always learn something new. I always get a new way to tweak my work and to make it better whenever I attend one of the professional development webinars. So thank you so much for your time today. For all of those that are joining as well, just this will be my advertising plug, is to plug, if you would like more content like this, please join us for our monthly webinars. But more importantly, our next convention, our next RCC National Convention, will be held April 15th to 17th in Salt Lake City. It is one not to be missed because we will be overlapping with both the Religion News Writers Association and with the International Association of Religious Journalists. It will be a three-way convention in Salt Lake City those 3 days, 15th to 17th of April. Check our webpage. More information will be coming soon, but we hope to see you all there. But thank you so much, Carolyn, again, for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. So,
Yep. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.
bye.